Dawn crept across the desert horizon with the soft patience of a hand smoothing linen. The first light touched the domes and rooftops of the old city, turning them from shadows into shapes, then from shapes into colors. Terracotta walls glowed faintly, narrow alleys began to reveal their patterned tiles, and the faintest gleam of brass caught fire where lanterns hung extinguished after the long night. The air was still cool, carrying the quiet fragrance of dust settled, of jasmine vines that had breathed through darkness, of bread beginning to rise in clay ovens tucked away in courtyards. In the courtyard of the perfumer's house, the morning began without hurry. The home belonged to a family whose craft of distilling flowers and woods into oil had passed from one generation to the next, like a sacred prayer. Layla moved quietly through the rooms. The workshop adjoined to the living quarters, its shelves lined with clay jars and glass vessels, its air perpetually infused with traces of rose, sandalwood, and amber resin. Even when empty, the room whispered of its purpose, as though the very walls remembered each scent that had lingered there. The day's first task was always the same: coaxing fire back into the stove. Ashes from the night before were brushed aside, and new wood was laid, thin slivers of kindling catching flame until the soft crackle grew steady. The stove's warmth spread through the house, and the faint metallic hum of kettles being set in place soon followed. A pot of water was left to heat slowly, destined to wash the night from face and hands. Another pot prepared for tea, brewed strong with mint leaves. In the courtyard, stone paving glistened with a sheen of dew. A basin at its center reflected the sky's pale rose. Birds hopped across the tiles, quick and alert, pecking at stray seeds scattered from the night before. From the lattice work above, vines leaned down, their blossoms still closed, but heavy with promise of fragrance once warmth touched them. The sound of a broom sweeping along stone corridors echoed faintly, joined by the call of a vendor somewhere beyond the wall, announcing warm bread. Breakfast came, simply yet beautifully. Flatbread warmed on the stove, its crust blistered in spots soft within. Honey, thick and golden, was ladled into a small dish, its surface catching the morning light. Dates, wrinkled but sweet, were set alongside, their flesh sticky and rich. Mint tea filled shallow glasses, steam carrying fragrance sharp and clean. Taken together, these offerings mark the passage from night into day more surely than any clock. Inside the workshop, shelves bowed under the weight of glass vessels, some holding powders of dried petals, some filled with oils already distilled, others empty, waiting for use. Copper alembics rested in one corner, their surfaces dulled with age but polished by frequent hands. Mortars and pestles lay on a side table, stone worn smooth from decades of grinding resins and herbs. The room was not yet alive with labor, yet already it breathed potential, like an instrument waiting for the first touch of a musician. A notebook, bound in leather darkened by years, sat open upon a wooden desk. Its pages bore recipes and ratios written in steady script. How many petals of rose to distill for a single vial? How long to soak sandalwood shavings before drawing out their essence? Which resins to combine for incense meant to calm unsettled minds? Between these lines were notes added in margins, words of caution, fragments of memory, praise for a fragrance long perfected. It was not only a book of craft, but a diary of generations. Outside, the city awakened with increasing certainty. The call of a water seller echoed down narrow streets, his brass cups clinking against one another. Hooves of donkeys struck cobblestones in slow rhythm, pulling carts laden with baskets. The voices of neighbors floated across walls, exchanging greetings as shutters opened to the day. From a distant minaret, a call to prayer lingered in the air, rising pure and steady before fading into silence. Life unfolded without urgency, yet with purpose, as it always had in this place. At the fountain, rose petals gathered the evening before were floated upon the surface, releasing faint fragrance as they drifted in circles. The sight was small but significant, beauty placed in the path of routine, reminding any who passed that life was not only work, but also wonder. After breakfast, preparations for the day's work began. Empty glass vials were rinsed and set upon cloths to dry. Bundles of herbs were untied, their leaves shaken free of dust before being hung once again from rafters. The stove's heat was coaxed steady to warm the water for distillation, filling the room with a soft hiss. Layla's hands moved with remembered rhythm, simple actions, each carrying weight, a cadence familiar and grounding. The market lay only a short walk away, and soon steps would carry there for spices and new jars, for bread still hot from ovens, for figs and almonds to sweeten the day. But for now, the house remained the center of the world, courtyard bathed in dawn, workshop filled with promise, breakfast leaving sweetness on the tongue. The city beyond continued to stir, but within these walls the morning stretched, unhurried, every sound, every scent, every motion wove into a tapestry both fragile and enduring. It was a beginning shaped not by haste, but by presence, by the careful attention to each small act that would, together, form the story of a day. As the sun climbed higher, pressing shadows into corners, blossoms began to unfurl. The courtyard filled with fragrance, and the perfumer's house stirred fully awake. As dawn yielded to morning, Layla's day of fragrance prepared to begin. Morning entered fully now, sunbeams spilling over rooftops, catching domes in golden fire, and sliding into narrow alleys where shadows still lingered. The city woke with measured rhythm, not hurried, not loud, but steady and certain. Vendors called to one another as shutters opened, and the fragrance of bread reached farther with each passing minute. Within the perfumer's house, Layla readied the day's true work to begin. The workshop seemed almost to inhale as the sun crept across its threshold. Light touched glass bottles on the shelves, drawing sparks of color from liquids within, pale green from mint, amber from resin, translucent rose from petals steeped days earlier. Copper gleamed faintly where alembics waited, their coils cool, their bases empty but ready. Mortars and pestles rested side by side, worn smooth by decades of grinding. Even before hands reached for them, the tools carried anticipation, as though they remembered the thousands of times they had served. The stove, coaxed into flame at dawn, now burned with steady patience. Water warmed in its pot, steam rising in pale ribbons. That sound of bubbling water carried through the room like a quiet song, promising that soon it would lend its breath to distillation. Nearby, baskets of petals waited, carefully gathered the day before when morning dew had not yet left them. Rose, jasmine, and marigold lay side by side, their fragrances mingling faintly even before heat touched them. Each blossom seemed to lean toward the light, eager to give itself to the craft. Layla's hands moved with ritual precision, Rose petals were lifted first, cool against the skin, their fragrance subtle, yet unmistakable. They were poured into the vessel, filling it in slow measure until copper brimmed with softness. Water followed, ladled carefully, settling over petals, ready to draw out their hidden life. The alembic's lid was lowered, its joints sealed, coil set in place. Fire beneath flickered low, coaxing water into transformation. The process unfolded at its own pace. First came stillness, then faint tremors as warmth spread through copper. Steam rose, invisible at first, then visible, as droplets formed along the coil, sliding downward into a glass vessel. Those drops carried the essence of roses, fragile in life, now preserved in water. They collected slowly, yet each drop was treasured, a fragment of morning captured for eternity. Jasmine followed next, its petals paler, almost translucent, but carrying a fragrance sharp enough to pierce through the heat of day. Petals were handled with care, as though too much weight might bruise them. They slipped into water like whispers, dissolving into its embrace. The coil sang again with droplets, this time sharper, brighter, carrying a fragrance that seemed to rise even before the vessel filled. Marigold came last, bold and bright, its petals glowing even after removal from stalks. Their scent was earthier, less delicate, but essential for balance. Placed into copper, they released an aroma that lingered in the workshop like sunlight itself. Drops fell steadily, golden in tint, joining those of rose and jasmine in separate jars. Three fragrances, distinct yet related, now rested side by side on the table. Layla opened the ledger, its pages waiting. In her deliberate script, she noted rose, soft and fleeting; jasmine, sharp, demanding restraint; marigold, grounding, holding the others steady. These words were not final judgments but observations, pieces of memory to be tested again tomorrow. Beside the writing, Layla dipped strips of paper into each jar, dried them briefly, then pinned them to the wall. A line of fragrances marked time more faithfully than any clock. Between tasks, Layla sustained herself. Bread, torn into pieces, dipped into oil, pressed with herbs. Cheese, salted and sharp, balanced with sweet figs. Water cooled by a clay jar soothed the throat, while tea, brewed again with mint, refreshed the mind. Meals were not interruptions, but extensions of work, fuel that allowed patience to last. Neighbors arrived during these hours, carrying errands of their own. One came seeking rose water to soothe cloth left in the sun too long. Another requested a small vial of jasmine to scent a wedding garment. They greeted her by name. "Layla," said one, "if you have a little jasmine for the bride's veil." Each request was answered not with haste, but with care, for perfume given to another carried trust. Coins exchanged hands at times, but often goods were traded instead. Bread for rose water, almonds for marigold essence. Commerce was not transaction, but conversation. Work continued. Layla pressed oils from sandalwood, ground shavings releasing fragrance that clung to fingers long after contact. Resins were warmed, their smoke rising in gentle curls, filling the room with sweetness that calmed even in silence. Each ingredient had its own voice, yet all sought harmony. Blending was not science alone, it was listening, asking what each essence wanted to say. By late morning, the air itself seemed perfumed. Every surface held some trace of fragrance, rose clinging to copper, jasmine floating near lattice, sandalwood pressed into stone mortar. Even Layla's garments bore the day's labor, fibers carrying hints of petals and resins. The workshop had become a vessel itself, distilling not only blossoms, but time. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shortened, heat pressed into the courtyard, vines overhead swaying gently as though resisting. Yet the fountain kept its voice steady, water falling in endless repetition, reminding all within earshot that motion could be calm. In that sound, the household found rhythm. When the final vials were sealed, Layla set them among the others on the shelf, their glass gleaming like captured light. Each held not only fragrance but story, of morning's work, of hands that had gathered petals, of fire that had coaxed water into steam. The workshop quieted again, though its air remained alive with scent. Layla closed the ledger, the coil left to cool, the tools set aside. Morning ended not with exhaustion, but with fulfillment, its labor complete, its memory preserved. Midday did not arrive with clocks, but pressed its palm against rooftops and courtyards until voices softened, footsteps slowed, and shade gathered under awnings like animals seeking cool. The sky burned white, the streets answered by lowering themselves into hush. Still, the market moved, threads of sound and scent woven into a single, shimmering cloth. By the time the basket met the stalls, it was feather light. With each stop, it learned weight and color. A spoon of saffron, bright as fire caught in thread, coriander that breathed of citrus before it spoke, cumin dark and steady, like earth after rain. Brass scoops chimed softly, paper cones crackled as they settled in. The air around the basket changed until it carried fields inside it, groves and gardens the eyes could not see. At the glassmakers, light became water. Bottles held it in different ways, reed thin, drop round, etched as finely as a whispered prayer. One faintly green vessel paused the hand above it, as if it already knew what it should hold. Layla chose it without flourish. Trust was the ornament she sought. Wrapped in straw, it nested among spice and cloth. Midday sang its smaller songs. A boy by the fountain pressed figs to show their ripeness. A sweetness broke open at first bite, seeds clicking like little stones. An elder sold almonds from a folded cloth, steady and dignified. Blessings passed alongside coin. Names were remembered, faces warmed, heat insisted. Beneath a faded awning, Layla let the fountain's cool script write itself across the air. Bread torn and dipped in oil, olives, figs, water from a brass ladle, metallic and clean. For a few minutes, the market seemed to fold its wings. Time moved, but quietly. Requests found their way like birds to a ledge. Rose water for linens, a winter blend recalled after its bottle had gone dry. Patience answered, how to stretch what remained, how to use each drop with care. Perfume was not only trade, it was inheritance passed palm to palm. The path home gathered fragrances as it turned. Doorways breathed lentils with garlic, bread asleep beneath cloth, meat turning over embers. Children ran past with date-sticky fingers and laughter bright as tin bells. At a corner, jasmine blossoms were strung into garlands, their coolness cutting through the sun. Layla chose one for the courtyard, a circle of shade made from scent. Back in the workshop, the basket opened like a story retold. Spices exhaled as they met their jars, the green bottle rinsed and set upon the shelf. Almonds in a dish, figs halved, their centers catching the narrow blades of light through the lattice. On the fountain's lip, the jasmine garland lowered its reflection into water. Ripples took it and kept taking it. Visitors came with errands and with news, a salve for weary feet, honey for lavender water, weather, caravans, a child's mischief. The courtyard gathered it all and returned it dressed in laughter. Craft belonged here, among voices. Bottles were only where it rested. The ledger received the day's brief history. Spices received, glass purchased, blends promised. The jasmine begun in the morning had deepened. A small trial was set aside to meet the cooler hour. For now the sun ruled, and bodies answered with stillness. Shutters lowered, one stayed ajar to admit a thin river of breeze. The fountain grew louder, once the market faded, a soft coin tumble of sound. Herbs drooped but did not complain. Midday, heavy as a hand on a shoulder, taught the lesson of pause. In the courtyard shade, thoughts loosened and drifted, attention turning to the saffron's red thread, the almond's warmth, the fig's clean sweetness. Noticing was part of the craft. Perhaps the heat pressed so insistently only to remind patience what it was. When the last guest stepped away and the shutters were drawn, quiet settled like cool cloth. Jars waited, the ledger closed, breath unknotted. Midday leaned toward afternoon the way shadow leans toward light. The house, fed by errands and brightened by neighbors, readied itself for subtler work. Reflection, blending, and the hush that lets a fragrance say what it means. Evening descended with deliberate tenderness, easing the day into its gentler half. The streets beyond the perfumer's house shifted from noise to murmur, vendors packing away baskets, children returning reluctantly from play. Air grew softer, touched with faint sweetness of smoke as lamps and stoves were coaxed to life. The sky, once brilliant, softened into layers of rose and amber, then deepened into violet. In the courtyard, Layla swept the stones again, not from need but from care, until they gleamed faintly in the fading light. A low table was carried into the open, covered with a cloth woven years ago, its edges frayed but its pattern still intact. Oil lamps were lit one by one, flames caught behind glass windows steady and golden. Circles of comfort stretched across the walls. Vines turned into lacework shadows. At the fountain, water continued its song, now glowing with reflections of fire instead of sun. Food followed in measured abundance. A pot of lentils simmered with cumin and garlic until it carried the scent of earth and spice. Flatbreads stacked high, still warm, edges blistered from the clay oven. Cucumbers stirred into yogurt cooled the tongue against heat of the day. A bowl of olives shone with oil, their salt bracing. Honey rested in a jar, thick and golden, while dates and almonds filled smaller dishes. Neighbors arrived bearing gifts, a jug of fresh milk, a basket of figs, a loaf dark with grain. Each offering was set among the others until the table resembled a feast, built not from wealth, but sharing. Layla poured the first glasses of tea, steam curling into evening air. Mint, bruised beneath sugar, released sharp perfume that rose above the food, and the faint rose water lingering in the courtyard. Glasses clinked as they touched the table. Conversation flowed as naturally as the fountain. Stories began as they always did, with laughter, with memory, with the rhythm of voices unhurried by time. One neighbor spoke of caravans crossing desert, stars so thick above the dunes they seemed to weigh the sky down. Another recalled a wedding long past, garlands of jasmine woven so heavily the city itself had smelled of it for days. An elder at the table offered a proverb, patience compared to distillation, too much heat and fragrance lost, too little and nothing drawn forth. A voice at the far side called softly, Layla, your rosewater held my mother in the room again, and the words were received not as praise but as blessing. The talk settled, then lifted. then settled again, like birds choosing a branch. Children circled the courtyard, their laughter softened by night's approach. Petals gathered in small fists were flung into the fountain, drifting as fragile boats before sinking beneath the surface. When tiredness overcame them, heads found shoulders, eyes closed against lamplight, breaths grew steady. The courtyard absorbed it all: noise, quiet, story, rest, holding it as though it were another vessel of fragrance. Between stories, rituals of scent appeared. A vial of rose water was passed, each guest dabbing a drop on fingers before touching temples or wrists. The jasmine garland purchased earlier was divided, sprigs handed to each visitor to carry home. In these moments, perfume was not commerce, but communion. A way of affirming beauty belonged to all, fragrance both intimate and shared. The meal wound to its gentle close with figs dipped in honey, almonds cracked open, bread crusts saved for broth. Tea poured again, this time unsweetened, cleansing the palate, anchoring the body for rest. Conversation slowed, yielding to thoughtful silences, punctuated by laughter or gratitude. The fountain's voice, unnoticed before, filled those pauses, steady and eternal. Neighbors departed gradually, each carrying something given: a packet of herbs, a slice of bread, a flower pressed into a hand. Farewells spoken in low tones, promises to meet again at market, at oven, in courtyard. Air emptied of voices remained thick with presence, as if walls themselves had absorbed warmth of gathering. Within the house, tasks resumed quietly. Bowls rinsed, cloth folded, lamps lowered until only a few flames kept the courtyard alight. The fountain continued its murmured blessing, its surface scattered with petals left from children's play. The workshop was visited briefly, not for labor, but acknowledgement. Strips of paper, still fragrant, pinned beside those of yesterday. Ledger updated with a final line. One vial lifted, tested once more, set aside as most promising of the day. Layla paused at the threshold as the room exhaled. Its scent would wait until morning, when air was clear and mind renewed. Evening completed its work, not only blending perfumes but weaving community. It balanced labor with laughter, solitude with story, effort with ease. As the last lamp lowered and shadows stretched long across the courtyard, evening yielded gracefully to night, leaving behind fragrance of bread, mint, rose, and memory. Night unfolded gradually, like a silken veil lowered over the city. The blazing heat of day gave way to gentler air, cooled by breezes drifting through alleys and courtyards, carrying scents of jasmine, dust, and faint smoke from extinguished fires. Above, the sky stretched immense and unbroken, stars glimmering like scattered seeds of light. The moon climbed with calm authority, silvering rooftops, domes, and tiles, turning the world into a quiet reflection of the heavens. The perfumer's house seemed to breathe differently beneath this cover. The courtyard, filled hours before with voices, now hosted silence as honored guest. Under Layla's hand, lamps were lowered one by one until only two flickered against the fountain's surface. Their glow caught petals floating there, remnants of children's play, drifting in slow spirals until they seemed more dream than flower. Shadows softened, vines overhead, painting lace across the stone floor whenever the breeze stirred. Inside the workshop, silence deepened into reverence. Shelves lined with bottles and jars no longer bustled with tasks, but waited with patience. The alembic, polished after its labor, gleamed faintly in the moonlight filtering through the lattice. Paper strips pinned to the wall whispered only faintly now. Fragrances that had spoken loudly by day now resting in memory. The ledger lay closed, pages filled with notes, each line like a step taken on a long path. Mortars and pestles rested as though in sleep, awaiting tomorrow. Even in stillness, the room bore witness to continuity. Evening rituals prepared body and mind for rest as carefully as distillation prepared flowers for essence. In the kitchen, Layla warmed a bowl of milk and stirred honey until its golden thread dissolved. Each sip coaxed breath into calm rhythm, grounding spirit in quietude. Bread crusts softened in the milk provided the final taste of the day. The dish was rinsed in cool water, its sound sharp in the hush, then set aside until morning. The sleep-in room invited stillness. Sheets smoothed, pillow straightened, blanket folded. A sachet of lavender tucked beneath the pillow released its calm fragrance, subtle but insistent. From a vial, a drop of rose water touched the linen, freshness lingering into the night. Each gesture was not indulgence but inheritance, passed down like the family's craft. Before surrendering to sleep, the courtyard was visited once more. At this hour, it belonged entirely to silence and sky. Layla paused by the fountain, its trickle mingled with rustle of leaves stirred by air. Above, constellations kept vigil, eternal yet intimate. Breath slowed naturally here, as though stars themselves taught rhythm. Water, cupped in hand, was pressed against the face, a final cleansing before retreat. The courtyard gave its blessing, and the door closed softly. The resting place welcomed its guest as earth receives seed, blanket drawn, muscles releasing, eyes closed not out of effort but trust. Lavender, rose, sandalwood, jasmine, all lingered faintly, guardians layered upon one another. Dreams crept gently, petals circling in water. Neighbors' laughter softened into music, glass vessels catching firelight, fragments wove into gardens never seen, streets imagined but familiar, faces remembered only in kindness. Sleep reshaped the day, not erasing but transforming it into another kind of story. Beyond the walls, the city slept as one body. Courtyards echoed only with fountains, alleys hushed except for a watchman's step, rooftops silvered by moon. Families rested, dreams carrying them to gardens, markets, and remembered stories. The perfumer's house joined this collective silence, inseparable thread in the city's great fabric. Stars bore witness, guiding caravans across deserts, blessing rooftops of countless homes. Tonight they shone the same, steady gleam reminding that even in silence there is constancy, even in stillness, continuity. Moonlight brushed vines, fountain, and shuttered windows, silvering all into serenity. Every corner of the house was wrapped in sky's embrace. Layla, the perfumer's daughter, was held within this embrace. Dreams carried her into gardens beyond walls, into fields where roses never wilted, into markets filled not with noise but fragrance. City, stars, roses, lavender, all kept watch. Night carried household and city alike into deep, unbroken rest. Thus ended the day, not abruptly but in surrender, not with silence as absence, but silence as presence. Breath evened, thought stilled, sleep deepened. Night held its vigil until dawn returned, ready to lift the veil and smooth the world awake.